Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel with the latest updates, this time from Canada. The situation under the leadership of Justin Castro Trudeau in Canada is getting worse every day on so many levels, whether it's the cost of living crisis, whether it's the treatment of Canadian citizens and their human rights and their individual liberties, but also the threat to a number of groups, including Christians and Jews in Canada, who are intimidated on a regular basis from the far left and Islamists. In this video, we're going to give you guys the latest updates on a number of Jewish synagogues around Canada getting high alerts and massive bomb threats from the Islamists. Of course, this is not a shock, but considering that the Prime Minister is a little bit quiet on this, that's concerning. Of course, if you're watching this live, we'll get your reaction as usual. Over the last few months, we've been seeing a huge number of protests and disruptions against Israel, but not just Israel, but also the Jewish community in Canada. At first, it started by focusing on the Israeli government, but then they escalated it, saying actually we're going to focus on Zionists, and then they basically changed the word to Jews. They don't really care, and now they're targeting synagogues. We've had a number of them. So at this point, over 100 Jewish synagogues and also community centers and other institutions across Canada have received a bomb threat email prompting investigation by the police and the RCMP. And this isn't really the first time something like this has happened. The number of synagogues have over the last few months been targeted physically in terms of their windows and the buildings in general, but that was mostly during the actual protests and riots. In terms of regular threats to the religious leaders as well as the actual institutions, this is all happening at the same time. It seems to be a coordinated attack or a threat because over 100 centers at the same time receiving similar threats. Obviously, it warrants a bigger investigation. The email sent early Wednesday morning, that was yesterday, threatened explosions in multiple cities, including Montreal and Toronto. Obviously, with the major cities becoming extremely cosmopolitan over the last few decades, it will be a little bit harder to find and identify these threats and the actual targets, mostly because we have a lot of people from different backgrounds and different ideologies all living among each other, and big cities make it harder for the authorities to identify where people are and who they actually are. Considering the last few years, the governments, including the Canadian government, have not been able to fully vet people's backgrounds when they entered Canada. At one point, Canadians were very generous and they said, well, everybody from the rest of the world, if you have a talent and if you want to contribute to Canada, you're welcome to come here. But that generosity was taken advantage of by a number of people from different countries and cultures that hate the Canadian culture. And of course, now we are seeing the result. The authorities are now conducting extensive sweeps and treating the threat seriously, but no immediate danger has been detected so far. So none of the buildings and the institutions have been blown up. So the authorities want you to believe everything's fine. I mean, I'm not really sure that's how it works, but if Justin Trudeau's establishment say don't worry about it, only over 100 of the synagogues might get blown up, but they haven't actually yet, so it's okay. There's no imminent threat. It reminds me of what I've been dealing with in London. Every time there's a threat against me, I get in touch with the Metropolitan Police and they say, oh, we are very concerned about this. Obviously, we are under-resourced. If there's an imminent threat, we will be there. It'll be a little bit too late by that point, Met, but okay, thank you for your support. Now, the situation in Canada is also escalating partly because of some of the news stories that have been coming out. There are headlines. This is about how Canada's off-the-record arms exports end up in Israel. Advocates say that Canada is flouting international obligations by allowing arms shipments to Israel via the United States. So all these propaganda. So this headline was, for example, from Al Jazeera, of course, the Qatari state-funded Al Jazeera. They have basically created more tensions over the last few weeks in Canada. We've got the far left and we've got the communists and, of course, the Islamists coordinating a number of campaigns and protests and essentially, obviously, intimidation tactics, because they blame the Canadian government for what they call genocide. I mean, as I've been saying for the past, how long has it been now? About 10 months, 9 months? It's been the most incompetent genocide program, if it is actually a genocide, considering it's still ongoing and Gaza is smaller than my living room. But according to the communists, it doesn't matter because it's Canada's fault that Yahya Sinwar in Gaza is not allowed to live freely and is still in hiding like a rat. Not really sure you can blame the Canadians for that, or even the Americans. If Yahya Sinwar and Ismail Haniyeh hadn't told their minions to invade Israel, this wouldn't have happened. But apparently that's propaganda. You invade a country, you F around, you will find out. And now we are seeing the result. Why wouldn't Canada sell arms to Israel? It's an ally and democracy. But this become complicated because Justin Trudeau, with his relationship with Macron, kind of went around the Anglosphere. So the UK and US, they had different positions. Until now, of course, the UK have now joined, the British government have joined essentially, to a point, the South African side and the Brazilian side. Because the British government now no longer objects to the arrest warrant against Benjamin Netanyahu, which is a betrayal of the partnership and the alliance that we have with Israel. Israel is an ally country, just like how France is supposed to be an ally country. Canada is an ally country. If of course something happens to Canada, it's our obligation to also help them and protect them. That's just how it works. Because if we get into trouble, if the French try to invade us, we would expect the Canadians to come and help us. That's just normal when it comes to geopolitics, whether you like it or not. But while that's the game, that's how the system works, the Canadian establishment shouldn't be ashamed of supporting an actual international ally. But of course, there's been a lot of pressure on the Liberal government, but it's mostly Emmanuel Macron. His influence around the world has been causing so much chaos, whether when it comes to Ukraine versus Russia, whether it's China versus Taiwan, and whether right now when it comes to Israel versus Narnia. Apologies, the Palestinian side. Narnia is actually real in the fictional world. But having said that, that's just one main problem. Again, the Justin Trudeau's government have not fully addressed this. Jen says Trudeau has shipped millions in to flood the cities. No surprise this is happening. Yeah, because it was working for the from the Liberal perspective in all our countries. They thought it was a good idea. A short-term boost to the GDP. Oh yeah, absolutely. And if you globalize all these countries, the Liberal left-wingers believe, because they hate the national cultures and sovereignties of the Western countries. They're ashamed of their own past and their history and everything else. On the one hand, they tell you that mass migration helps short-term GDP boost. On the other hand, what they're actually doing is they are globalizing all our countries, so that basically London or Toronto simply become, and they have become, an international hub for business opportunities without any sort of unity, any coercion, any sort of harmony in these societies. They don't really care, and that way they can keep pushing for more of a globalist perspective, so that we could all just be the same, but not in a good way. We will all be dependent on the globalist states and corporations, because they are there to save you from yourself, as they say. Heather says this stuff is happening in our larger cities. We have a PM ding dong who cares more about selfies than the economy. We want to divorce him like his wife is doing. Oh yeah, oopsie. Obviously the Canadian Tories are stepping up their game, and in terms of the campaigning, and to be fair, Poilievre has been quite spot on so many of the speeches and interviews he's done. There's still more people in Canada he needs to convince from the Conservative perspective, but we are where we are. Now, there's also, obviously a lot of people talk about synagogues, but when it comes to Christian churches, in Canada, for years and years, the Canadian establishment still were proud to say that, yes, we are, on the one hand, a liberal secular society. We're not going to get politics involved with religion and everything else. But they never completely undermined Christian churches and Christianity in general. Although the last 10 years, definitely the last 7-8 years, but the last basically decade, you can see a bit of change. All at the same time. Just like it's happened in the UK and also in the US when it comes to US Democrats. We remember the time when even presidential candidates from the US Democrats, they spend a lot of time in churches during their campaigns. This time round, I'm pretty sure I haven't even seen Joe Biden at any of the churches. And Kamala Harris right now, we don't even know where she is. Apart from obviously turning up to DNC and giggling the whole time. She hasn't actually done many speeches or interviews anyway. But things are changing. The Western liberal lefties, they're no longer even pretending. That's the main point. They no longer pretend to be something they're not. Super chat from Donna saying, your t-shirt, like your poster wouldn't be good. Is that wouldn't be good, or is it like would be good, right? It's we've had a number of people suggesting maybe I should put the bulldog thing as part of the merchandise, but I'm pretty sure the person who actually owns the right to this, because I didn't paint this, will be a little bit upset unless we just change the dog's face or something like that. For now, you could get one of these. Why not? Unite the Kingdom. You could get your own Unite the Kingdom t-shirt or hoodie or hats or whatever you like by clicking on the link in the description under the video. You get access to all the different colors, all the sizes, and all the genders. 72 million genders. Even if you're a penguin, you can get one of these Unite the Kingdom merch. Spring says she's having a poser candidacy. Is that Kamala? Yeah. Kristen says, new buildings nearby, there are several huge Christian churches. Eastern Orthodox churches are sprouting. So some good news. Yeah, I mean, that again really depends on where you're talking about. So for example, in the US, we have been hearing a number of smaller towns and villages in east of Texas, southeast of Texas, as well as Florida. They actually see more Christian institutions being built up, but that's a rarity when you compare to the wider country in the US, in Canada, in the UK. I mean, UK is completely lost now anyway, because Church of England doesn't even like to use the word church in its name. So what are you expecting from them? Fiona says, you need a Persian cat t-shirt. Persian cat t-shirt. Like a Bond villain. Yes, why not? Blue Sapphire says, the worst part is that literally none of this is reported in the line media. Wouldn't be a must to actually tell people that there's a bomb threat in city? That's a good point. Now, so many stories are not being reported by the media, but a lot of times the media would probably say, well, what 2CTV reported is probably not a priority. But I'm pretty sure when over 100 synagogues and other Jewish institutions and community centers are receiving bomb threats, and the actual authorities are saying we are doing an extensive investigation, I'm pretty sure this should be an international headline for even CNBC in America. Because if it's happening in Canada, it could start happening in the US, in the UK, and elsewhere. I think people need to know, especially those in Canada, they need to know what's happening. But apparently, it's not really a priority. Avalon Jewish says, stop Anglophobia. Yeah, we do need to turn that into a thing. Considering we could just add anything to phobia these days, we've got Islamophobia and all that. Anglophobia is definitely a thing, because there's a whole group of people who are sometimes born in the Anglosphere, who openly say they are against the Anglo culture, especially in England. So that's by definition should be Anglophobia, or at least hatred against the Anglosphere in general. Here in Toronto, they have converted a lot of churches into housing. Wow, in other parts of the world, including Western Europe, a lot of churches are now turning into mosques. So housing, unless it's although housing for whom? That's the main question, isn't it? Is it for the migrants? Ollie says, people forget that they are supposed to work for us, not go off and do their own thing after sucking up at election time. Well, that's a good point, because as what we've seen, especially in France, but even in the UK, during election times, centrist parties and centre-left parties all suddenly become right-wing. Everybody suddenly becomes right-wing. Oh yes, we're going to tackle the border crisis. We will do this, we will do that. And then the moment they win, all that goes away. Emmanuel Macron stood in the last election on a very right-wing platform. He was saying he's going to basically, in the name of free speech, get rid of Islamists, do mass deportations. What happened with that? I mean, he's deporting them, but through the other side, giving them dinghies to get to England. So he's getting rid of some of the migrants in France. So this is the latest update on what's going on in Canada. Of course, it's very worrying for especially the Jewish community in Canada, but everybody else as well, because if you stop blowing up synagogues, then there are people in the neighborhood as well who are not Jewish. We'll keep you guys posted on this to see if the investigation from the Canadian authorities get anywhere. I'm Maya Tusi, and we are the media.